You paid for me. Now finish it, she said, but what he found underneath shattered him. Rain lashed against the broken windows of Dry Creek's last standing saloon, the kind of night when men drowned their regrets in cheap whiskey and silence. Elias sat alone, the brim of his hat low, listening to the storm scrape against the roof like claws. He hadn't planned to spend money that night. He rarely did. But when the madam shoved a frail figure into the candlelight and muttered, "Cheap. As a bottle, if you've got the coin," something inside him shifted. She stood barefoot, her hair plastered to her cheeks, her body trembling not from cold but from something deeper. Dirt streaked her arms, and her dress was so thin it looked more like shame than cloth. Elias slid a few silver coins across the table without speaking. The madam snatched them fast. The girl's wide eyes locked on his, and her lips trembled as she whispered, "You paid for me. Now finish it." But those words weren't a promise. They were a sentence. On the ride back to his cabin, Elias kept glancing over. She sat stiff in the saddle behind him, clutching his coat as if afraid the world might swallow her whole if she let go. Every gust of wind carried her shallow breathing, and every jolt of the horse revealed bruises hidden by shadows. Elias had seen women in brothels before, but this one carried something else, something that clawed beneath her skin. When they reached the cabin, lightning lit the night, and for the first time Elias saw her face clearly. Bruises painted her cheekbones. A welt ran down her neck. Her eyes weren't the eyes of someone who'd been sold. They were the eyes of someone already owned, already broken. He stoked the fire, set a blanket around her shoulders, and asked her name. She flinched, as if even a question were a whip. Silence stretched long. Finally, she whispered, "Clara." The name fell like a fragile truth between them. Elias poured her water, but when she reached for it, her sleeve slipped back, and he saw it. A brand seared into her wrist, half hidden by dirt. His jaw tightened. He'd seen marks like that before, not from brothels, but from men who claimed ownership like cattle. The storm outside howled louder, but inside, Clara's breath was the only sound. Elias leaned back, staring into the flames. He thought he'd just paid for a night. Instead, he realized he had just bought a war. The storm broke at dawn, leaving the plains washed clean but heavy with silence. Elias stepped outside, the earth soft beneath his boots, and breathed in the sharp smell of wet dust. Behind him, the cabin door creaked, and Clara appeared, wrapped in the same blanket he'd given her. The firelight from inside kissed her bruised face, and for a moment Elias wished he could pretend she was just another drifter seeking shelter. But when she moved, he caught the faint wince of pain, and the truth pressed harder. He poured coffee into a tin cup and handed it to her. She held it with both hands, the steam rising to her lips. Only then did Elias notice the tremor in her wrists. That brand, an ugly crescent seared deep into her skin, peeked out like a ghost that wouldn't let go. Elias set his jaw. "Who marked you?" She didn't answer at first. She sipped the bitter coffee, staring at the horizon where the clouds broke into strips of gold. Finally, she whispered, "Not who. What?" Her voice cracked. "A house. A name. Men who own everything they touch." She pulled the blanket tighter. And as it slipped across her shoulder, Elias saw the stitched line running down her back. Not the work of a doctor, rough, jagged, like leather sewn by a drunk hand. The scar told a story of knives, of punishment, of survival. Elias felt something hot rise in his chest. Anger, yes, but also fear. He'd fought bandits, seen the cruelty of men in dusty border towns, but this was different. This was branded cruelty, organized and proud. The sound of distant hooves carried on the morning wind. Clara froze, her knuckles whitening around the tin cup. Elias heard it too, the slow, steady rhythm of men who weren't riding for trade. He stepped to the doorway, his hand brushing the butt of his revolver. Clara's voice cut through the silence, soft but sharp. "They'll come. They always come." Elias turned to her, eyes hard. "Not here." But even as he spoke, he knew it wasn't true. Out here in the West, no man could buy peace, and the silver coins he'd spent last night had done more than free a woman. They had purchased her chains and tied them to his door. Elias had thought he'd paid for company. Instead, he realized he'd inherited a hunt. Elias worked the land as though the weight of silence could be tilled into soil. He chopped wood, repaired the fence line, and brought water from the well, all while Clara lingered nearby, watching, never speaking unless pressed. Her hands, delicate but scarred, reached to help him stack kindling or stir the pot at supper. It was in those small, almost invisible acts that Elias began to notice something shift. One evening, as the sky burned orange with dusk, Clara bent to sweep the cabin floor with a bundle of straw. Elias pretended to busy himself fixing a saddle strap, but his eyes kept drifting toward her. She moved carefully, wincing when her back bent too far, yet there was determination in every sweep of her hand. A woman once forced into silence was now carving a place in his cabin, as if declaring, "I exist here. I matter here." When she thought Elias was asleep, Clara whispered things into the darkness. He lay still, listening. Whispers of a childhood by the river, a brother lost to fever, a promise once made to herself, that she'd never kneel again. The words trembled, but they carried the steel of someone who had endured too much and survived anyway. The fire cracked softly, painting shadows across her face. Elias's chest tightened. He knew what it meant to carry pain in silence, to wake at night hearing echoes of past battles. In her murmurs, he heard a mirror of himself. The next morning, she placed a folded cloth on the table, salve she'd made from crushed herbs outside. "For your hands," she said simply. Elias rubbed it in, the scent sharp and earthy. It stung, but he didn't wince. Her gaze lingered on his cracked skin, and when their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. Out here in the Wild West, a single choice could decide who lived, who died, and who was forgotten in the dust. If this story has already gripped you, don't just ride past. Saddle up with us. Subscribe now for more tales of love, survival, and the scars a man can't outrun. Because the next turn in this story may change everything. At sundown, while Elias brought in the last of the tools, he caught the glint of metal on the horizon. A signal. Someone had lit a lantern in the hills, flashing deliberately. Clara saw it too, her face drained of color. "They've found me," she breathed, clutching her wrist as if the brand burned fresh. Elias's grip tightened on the axe handle. The bond they had begun to weave was fragile, tender, but now it had painted a target large enough for rifles to see, and the riders would not wait long. The night fell heavy, carrying the smell of smoke and iron. Elias stood by the cabin door, rifle in hand, while Clara paced like a caged bird. In the distance, torches flickered along the ridge. Riders, half a dozen, maybe more, waited in the dark, their horses restless, their laughter drifting on the wind. They weren't in a hurry. Men like that never rushed. They wanted him to feel the weight of their presence, to sweat before the storm broke. Clara's fingers dug into her blanket. They don't forgive. They don't forget. Once you're marked, you're theirs forever. Her voice shook, but her eyes burned with defiance. Elias kept his own voice low, steady. Not tonight. Not while you're under my roof. They spent the next hour in silence, broken only by the fire's crackle. Elias loaded every cartridge he had, laying them neat on the table. Clara moved beside him, trembling, but when his hand brushed hers, she didn't pull away. For the first time since she'd arrived, her fear wasn't of him. It was of losing what little sanctuary they'd built in these fleeting days. Hooves thundered closer. The ground itself seemed to shiver as the riders fanned out around the cabin. Lantern light threw long shadows against the wooden walls. Then a voice called out. Sharp, mocking, familiar. "Elias! You bought something that ain't yours to keep!" Elias's jaw locked. He knew that voice. Jed Callahan, a man who made his fortune trading flesh and fear. A man Elias had once left bleeding in a ditch years back, thinking him finished. "You've got until dawn," Jed called. "Send her out, or we'll burn you out." Clara gripped Elias's arm. "If you fight them, they'll kill you." Elias looked at her, steady, unflinching. "If I give you up, I'm already dead." The riders shifted, restless. Rifles glinted in the torchlight. Clara's breath hitched. Elias stepped outside, rifle raised, the wind tugging at his coat. For a heartbeat, the world held its breath. Man against many, a cabin against the night. And then, from the shadows, another figure rode forward. Someone Elias did not expect. Someone whose presence would change everything. The torches hissed in the cold air. The standoff had begun. The rider dismounted slowly, boots sinking into the mud. The firelight revealed a face Elias had prayed he'd never see again. Daniel, his own blood brother. Once partners, once bound by loyalty, now turned against each other by choices made long ago. Daniel's eyes, cold and sharp, flicked from Elias to Clara. "You should have left well enough alone," Daniel said, his voice gravel rough. "She's property. You know how the world works." Elias felt Clara's hand tighten around his sleeve. Property. The word cut deeper than any blade. He remembered Clara's whispers in the dark, the vow she'd made never to kneel again. That vow now rested squarely in his hands. Jed Callahan laughed behind Daniel. "Blood or not, you'll hand her over. Or you'll both rot in ashes." The flames from their torches hissed higher, lighting the cabin walls. Clara stepped forward, her eyes locked on Daniel. "Then burn me. Better the fire than chains." Her voice shook, but it carried, slicing through the night. Daniel's jaw clenched. For a flicker of a moment, Elias saw conflict in his brother's eyes, but greed and pride smothered it fast. He raised his revolver. "Don't make me do this, Elias," the world narrowed. The sound of the wind, the restless horses, Clara's breath, everything pressed into a single heartbeat. Elias lifted his rifle. "You already did." The crack of gunfire split the night. Daniel staggered back, his pistol clattering into the mud. The riders reeled, unsure, torches whipping in the sudden chaos. Jed cursed, spurring his horse forward, but Elias fired again, one shot that shattered the lantern in his hand, spilling fire into the dirt. Horses screamed. Men scattered. The siege broke like glass under a hammer. Silence returned in jagged pieces. Daniel lay gasping, the life leaking from him faster than his pride. Elias knelt, eyes burning, and for the last time looked at the man who once shared his blood. Daniel tried to speak, but no words came. Only regret. Then nothing. Clara knelt beside Elias, her trembling hand brushing his. Tears cut tracks through the dirt on her cheeks. He looked at her, and though he had killed to keep her free, he saw something he had not expected. Strength. Not his, but hers. The dawn broke over Dry Creek, painting the cabin in pale light. Clara stood at the threshold, the brand on her wrist still raw but no longer a shackle. Elias joined her, silent. Out here in the Wild West, every choice carried a price. If this tale of sacrifice and survival has held you close, don't ride away just yet. Subscribe for more stories like this, because in the dust and silence, love may be scarcer than water, but it always finds a way.